This is a response to other 4815's video, Atheism and Evolution. In it, you say you're going to explain why no Christian can accept evolution and why evolution and atheism are inextricably linked. And in this one, I'm going to explain to you why you're wrong. Okay, let's get started.
Evolution states that new species can form over time due to mutations in generations. Over a great length of time, a new species will arise because of these mutations.
That's a somewhat crude but barely passable description of evolution, and it's not my aim in this video to correct you on the details, except to say that you neglected to mention the linchpin of the theory, the driving force that molds order out of that randomness. You didn't even mention natural selection. But I do have to applaud you for one thing, and that's for recognizing that evolution requires vast expanses of time, and that's important, and I'll get back to it in a minute.
That's never been observed. This hasn't happened, although I'll claim that it does. I'll point to small changes within bacteria or viruses and say that's proof of evolution. That's proof of changes. Variations can occur within a grouping.
So by grouping, I assume you mean the word kind. Now that's a creationist word that was eviscerated a long time ago because creationists either refuse to or can't define it. So I find it interesting that you paused and then you deliberately chose to use a different word. It's as if you were trying to disguise an argument that you know has already been refuted. And I assume you did that because you know that science has described a ton of different modern speciation events, and that dismissing them out of hand as just variations in the same kind is completely unsubstantiated and is a claim that holds no water. But hold on, that's not all. Now, let's go back to your tacit acknowledgement earlier that evolution must occur over eons, so that when you go ahead and demand to see examples of the direct observation of extant species evolving into morphologically distinct descendants, essentially in the span of a handful of human lifetimes, you must know that you're asking for something that can never be found, and something that evolution predicts simply can't happen. Now, let me take these 2 points and ask you a question. Do you really think you're being intellectually honest? In fact, are there any other words you can use to describe this kind of behavior? And while you think about that, you might want to consider asking yourself why, if you are so sure about the strength of your position, so sure that you know the absolute truth, you are willing to swathe your arguments in a cloak of deception. If you're so right, why would you have to?
Evolution occurs in the speciation sense. That would mean that death would have to exist, since that's the only way for change to occur.
At least we can agree on something. Without death, there would be no need to adapt for survival, and therefore no selective pressure to drive evolution.
Death exists because of our sin, because we live in a fallen creation.
Now hang on. You wouldn't care to back that up in any kind of way, would you? You know, maybe with something that could be verified in some way? Any kind of evidence? Which forces me to ask why you don't think it's strange that you make the most unreasonable demands of the evidence for evolution, and yet are happy enough to make and accept the most outrageous claims in the support of your beliefs, without a shred of empirical support, and without even batting an eyelid. Does that seem in any way even-handed to you?
Now, how can evolution have occurred before sin entered into the world? So how can a Christian, therefore, believe in evolution?
So, without even a vague effort to establish the truth of your premise in any way, you use it to conclude that no Christian can believe in evolution. Let me point out a small problem with your reasoning. You see, this unjustified assertion that this book of yours is an inerrant historical record assumes that all Christians share your particular delusion. But the fact is that the majority of Christians saw the futility in defending these primitive fables a long time ago, and reality won. That even includes these guys. If they could do it, Why can't you? So, with that in mind, what you really, in effect, should have said is that this is why no biblical literalist, reality-denying, thought-averse troglodyte can believe in evolution. And that's why, despite any protestations you might make, Christians can and do believe in it. All it takes is a healthy dose of perspective and the balls to accept that maybe parts of your book should only be taken allegorically. Once you do that, you can believe in any god you like, but now you can also appreciate the beauty of reality as revealed by science. Now, you might say, hold on, if you wanted to refute this argument. Those aren't real Christians. That's why they deny the Bible. So, if you are inclined to take that approach, then just remember that there are over 30,000 denominations of Christianity in the United States alone, let alone the rest of the world. So if you do, then be prepared to explain exactly and precisely why you have the authority to judge which ones are real and which ones aren't.
Right now, the claim that atheism and evolution have nothing to do with one another is nonsense. Alright, you find me an atheist that believes in creation. Those are the only two options, is creation and evolution. It's not a false dichotomy. There are only two options. You think that there's more than two, then present more than those two.
Now then, whether that's a false dichotomy really depends on what you mean by creation. If you mean your particular cult's creation myth, then I'd be happy to present you with an almost endless array of alternatives. Would you care to explain to us why you feel the evidence for and the merits of your particular fantasy are greater than for any other of these primitive flights of fancy? And if that's not what you meant, then that leaves you with having to define creation as a supernatural event instigated by some undefined being. But that's not the God you believe in, is it? So why would you waste your time arguing about a position that neither you nor your opponent holds? And how would you justify using one God in your first argument and then turning to another for your second? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Even if you take the dichotomy you present, it's not an issue to atheists, because an atheist would be happy to say one thing that creationists seem to be really uncomfortable about admitting, and that's, I don't know. I'll explain by turning the clock back 300 years. If you'd asked an atheist then whether the diversity of life had been created by a god or by natural processes, he would have said, I don't know, because of the absence of any evidence to support either position. 100 years later, the age of the Earth was being revealed and the fossil record uncovered. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck presented his theory of the heritability of acquired characteristics. If you asked an atheist then, he might say, I don't know about God, and I'm not sure, but there is some evidence that suggests there may be a natural explanation. 50 years later, more facts have been collected, and Darwin wove them into his theory of evolution by natural selection. After that, the atheist might say, God might exist, but there are other explanations that are perhaps more plausible. And 150 years after that, back in the present day, where the mountain of evidence supporting evolution is so vast that it eclipses the data supporting any other theory in the whole of science, now, the atheist says, the variety of life is beautifully explained by the theory of evolution beyond all reasonable doubt, and while the existence of God might be a technical possibility, I see no compelling evidence to support a belief in his existence. So, contrary to your assertion, acceptance of evolution is not a requirement for atheism. Atheists existed long before evolutionary theory. Acceptance of evolution is not the default position for atheism, so while, by definition, you'll never be able to find your creationist atheist, how does that in any way imply that all atheists accept evolution, or need to? You seriously need to examine your logic. Atheists don't want to believe in anything. They accept various premises about the world based on the available facts and on the evidence. They don't accept evolution as some kind of crutch or justification for their non-belief. They accept it because it's by far the best explanation for the diversity of life on Earth based on what we can repeatedly observe and measure and not on what makes us feel good. Similarly, they don't accept the premise of God because there's no empirical evidence to support it. So, if you want to go on deluding yourself, feel free. But if you try and pass off your delusion onto atheists, if you try to make us out as irrational denialists, then please expect to get called out on it.